Good evening, this is Quintus Curtius. Welcome back to the podcast. And it's been a while since my last podcast. I don't know exactly how long. I think it's been probably maybe about a month, maybe a little bit more than that. And sometimes things are like that. Sometimes if you don't have anything to say, it's better just to hang back until you do find something to talk about that's worth talking about. So that's what I did. I focused a little bit more on publishing articles on my site. But I just thought of something today that I thought would be worth talking about a little bit in a podcast. And the issue really here is this. It's the idea that sometimes you have to be wrong. Sometimes you have to be wrong. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, sometimes for the sake of harmony, sometimes for the sake of tranquility, being right should take a back seat to preserving a level of harmony that serves the greater good. And I was reminded of this a few weeks back when I was talking to a friend of mine, good guy, and he's married to a foreign girl, and she's very nice too. And somehow we got into talking about relationships and marriage and whatnot, all these things. And he volunteered this information. He said, hey, she comes from a very good family. She was brought up right. She was brought up in the right way. And I said, what do you mean by that, man? What are you actually trying to say? He said, well, her mother once took her aside and said, in a marriage, when you're married, sometimes you got to be wrong. Sometimes you kind of have to take the hit. Sometimes you, even if you think you're right, for the sake of domestic harmony, you have to suck it up, shut your mouth, and just keep on moving forward. And I thought that was a very wise thing to say. And I think that's the type of advice that's applicable not just to women, but men, to anyone really. Because I think in our culture we have this tendency, and when I say our culture, I'm talking about modern American culture. There's this overbearing tendency that we have that's reinforced by the media, reinforced by the culture, reinforced by everything, which is you've got to be assertive, you've got to stand up, you've got to tell them what you think, you've got to get in there, you've got to say your piece, you've got to assert yourself. It's over and over and over. You get the idea. It's this idea, this hyper-individualist ethic that has taken hold to the exclusion of everything else in this culture. And this is really destructive. And of course, I'm not saying, someone is going to hear this and say, oh, well, but it's important to be an individual. I'm not saying it's not important to stand up for yourself. I've been writing about that for years, okay? I don't need to be told that. I'm not saying that asserting yourself, standing up for yourself, fighting your corner, fighting your issues is not important. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time and a place for everything. And sometimes the greater good is not being right about everything. This is a disease that I think that is a real affliction of the modern American mentality. This idea that we all have to be right about everything. You see people out there in the media, you see people out there on the internet or Twitter or whatever, and their blogs, and dissecting about how everybody else is wrong, explaining, dissecting, advocating how right they are and how wrong everybody else is. Now, far be it from me to judge who's right or who's wrong about some situation that I don't know anything about. I'll leave it to the universe to judge that. But what I am saying is that we should consider this. We should consider the good of the greater harmony that is served by sometimes just shutting your mouth and dealing with an issue biting your tongue and just going with the flow. Because it doesn't matter what relationship you're in. It doesn't matter whether you have a business relationship, a professional partnership, or whether you have a domestic relationship with a spouse or whatever you have. Whatever type of relationship we're talking about here. Sometimes you have to suck it up. Sometimes it's not important to be right. Being right is overrated. Being right does not help us get along in everything in life. It helps us get along in many things. It helps us to be successful in our job. It helps us to be productive in our endeavors. It marks the upward slope of progress, I think, in many ways, or at least the conviction that we're being right. But sometimes it doesn't. And you have to know when to turn rightness on, and you have to know when to turn rightness off. Being right is overrated. Don't seek to be right. Seek to be good sometimes. And again, what I mean by that is, don't focus so much, don't fixate so much on being the smart guy, about being the one who always has the answers, about being the one who's always the most doctrinally pure person. It doesn't matter. No one cares. Nobody gives a shit. What matters is, are you serving the greater good? And this is something that the dorks, the dunces, the freaks never really get. They don't get this. They think that being right, they think that parsing out every little nuance of this or that or the other thing is somehow some sort of cathartic experience in righteousness. They somehow think that being right or proving to the other person that they're right is somehow some sort of vindication, some cosmic vindication of their sanctity somehow. Whereas the more important thing is to preserve harmony, to accomplish the mission, to get the job done, to serve the greater good. But then again, the greater good, that's an ethic that's banished from consideration in modern American life. We're not allowed to consider the greater good because, hey, what matters is me, right? That's what matters, doesn't it? Attention whoring, attention seeking, stomping your feet, beating your chest, telling everyone how great, telling everyone how right you are. But I say, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a shit. You know, Theodore Roosevelt used to have a word for these types of people. He used to call them dialecticians. Dialecticians was his word, was Theodore Roosevelt's word for these antiseptic, clinical, cold, calculating, reptilian snakes who always had to be right, but yet never considered the greater good. They never considered the good of the group ahead of their own personal good. And this is what matters. This is what matters. So that's my point. That's really my point here in this podcast. I think we should pay more attention to sometimes thinking about, are my actions serving the greater good? Are my actions serving the integrity of this relationship? And remember the advice of the older woman to her daughter who was about to get married to this American that I just told you about at the beginning of this podcast. And she told her daughter, sometimes you have to be wrong. Sometimes you have to suck it up. Sometimes you can't be right all the time. And I think we all need to take a page from that lesson. We all need to process that. And I've tried to do that myself. Whenever I find myself getting into disputes or arguments with other people, I say to myself, pull back. I say, wait, does it really matter who's right here? Why do I feel like I have this need to be right about everything? I'll try to say this to myself so I can check myself, so I can disengage my ego, disengage my pride from the conflict of the moment. because that's what really matters, doesn't it? That's what really matters. The greater good. We have to move away from the ethic of individualism and more towards the ethic of the group, more towards the ethic of the community. See, everybody wants to talk about all this community this and community that and my group, but they don't want to accept the responsibilities that go along with that, being part of that group. It's very easy to identify yourself with some sort of group as long as, of course, you have no reciprocal responsibilities. Isn't it amazing how that works? Isn't it amazing how they always manage to square that circle so that it all comes out perfectly in their favor? So that's what I will say, that's what I would submit to you, is to think about the idea of the greater good. Sometimes in life you have to be wrong. Sometimes you have to be wrong. Learn how to be wrong. Learn how to take the hit. Learn how to suck it up. Learn how to bite your tongue. Learn how to bite the inside of your cheek and take the pain. Learn how to do that. And if you can do that, you will become that much greater as a person. So that's all. This is Quintus Curtius. Good night.